Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. As-salatu was-salamu alayka ayyuhan nabi. Brothers and sisters, those watching online, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. So inshallah, for the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to build up on what we were speaking about yesterday, and specifically today and maybe perhaps tomorrow, just unpack a couple of things for us to be focusing on now. Because as Bhai mentioned, we're coming to the final Ashra of Ramadan, the final 10 days soon. And we're going to be having to think about what is our takeaway out of this month. And if you recall, when we first started the Taraweeh program together, we spoke about the why Allah created us, that we should be pondering. The what is it that Allah wants from us? And finally the how do we achieve what Allah wants? And so, but what I want to do over the next, today and perhaps tomorrow as well, is just for us to realign our objective, to really understand what it is that we want, or how do we cultivate that relationship with Allah Azza wa Jalla. Because from a worship perspective in this month, it's easy. You have the Taraweeh in the evening, you have the fast during the day. But that concept of trying to understand the taqwa, that relationship with Allah, that's up to you. You need to have that mindset, that objective, that Allah is my objective. Because the issue that we have in our daily lives is that we have everything else as an objective and Allah is a sub-objective. So for example, in our early parts of our year, our objective is I want to get an education. Then it's I want to get a job. Then I want to find the right spouse. Then I want to get a house. All of these things we make our objective, but they go that your real objective should be bigger than yourself. And there's nothing bigger than us, than Allah Azza wa Jalla. If you have Him as your objective, then everything changes. It just puts everything else into place. Now that's the kind of the bigger piece. But what I want to do, inshallah, with the brothers and sisters that we have here is just to understand how we have that intimate relationship with Allah. Because one thing to note about the companions of the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they weren't all scholars. They weren't all like assiduous worshippers, i.e. Abid. In fact, they say Khalid bin Walid radiallahu anhu only knew a few surah of the Quran. But the difference is that whilst all of them weren't Abids, all of them weren't scholars, all of them were awliya. They were all friends of Allah Azza wa Jalla. Allah was pleased with them and they were pleased with Allah. So what does that tell you and me? It means that to get close to Allah, you don't have to do it through worship. To get close to Allah is not through scholarship. Because some companions were what? Some were slaves. Only a few were scholars, such as Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. Some were traders, some worked in the farm. So what does that tell you and me? That in our life, whether we're an Uber driver, whether working in the city, whether we're doing taxi, whether we're working in retail, whatever we are doing, we can still achieve that status of being a friend of Allah. Now that's not a small thing, because the companions achieved it, farmers achieved it, warriors achieved it, businessmen achieved it. The analogy there is for you and I. That's what we want. That's the takeaway, that we can cultivate a relationship between you and your Lord. That's what the Prophet ﷺ was doing, beautifying the relationship between the people and Allah and between people and people. So that's the first element. The second element now is, because that's the high level stuff, but now we're going to get into the granular. Because where is it that we fall short? Where are the issues that we have? Because you have to first understand Allah and that relationship that you want to cultivate. And the second thing is, and I mentioned this yesterday, which is that many of us sit in two camps. We have our worship camp, and then we have our sin camp. And one doesn't interrelate with the other. Like many of us might be fasting this Ramadan, might be praying this Ramadan, but it's not stopping us from swearing. It's not stopping us from smoking. It's not stopping us from watching dodgy things on the TV or on our phones. That's not changing. How can that be? It's not stopping us from abusing our wives or vice versa. So So we're doing more worship, but our sin count hasn't changed at all. Hardly any issue. There's an issue there. There has to be a correlation between that. And the thing that I want to unpack with you today is the story, again, that Allah mentions in the Quran, which is of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam. And remember that one of the things we mentioned at the outset, and we related the story of Allah Azza wa Jal, Adam alayhi salam, and Shaitan. And now I want to go, and why did we mention that? Because Allah teaches us through stories. Because He knows us best, He created us. And in stories you have the lessons and the analogies. And the story, many of us know the story of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam. They say half of all beauty was in his face. Yeah? That's how beautiful Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam was. And we all know the story about, there's nasheeds on when Zuleika called, because basically when it got out in town that Zuleika liked Yusuf alayhi salam, the other women started gossiping. Well, she fell in love with the slave, she fell in love with the servant, and then what did she do? She called all her friends over, she gave them a fruit, and she gave them a knife. Invited them out for a dinner, got them all around. She had hidden Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam. She got them all to start cutting the fruit, and then she unveiled Sayyidina Yusuf from behind the curtain, and they were so mesmerised with the beauty, what did they do? They all cut their fingers. Some say cut their fingers completely off, they didn't even realise. And that was her way of teaching them, okay, you making fun of me? Let's see how much you guys got captivated by him. But that's not the story that I want to unpack. It's the one that Allah Azza wa Jalla speaks about, that what Yusuf alayhi salam did, and think about this, how Allah attests to him. Right? Allah speaks of him and his rank. They say that when Zuleika invited Yusuf alayhi salam into her chamber, she invited Yusuf alayhi salam into her chamber. He came in, she locked the door and she hid the key. She locked the door and she hid the key. And then she tried to seduce Yusuf alayhi salam. And as she did so, what did Yusuf alayhi salam do? He said, I seek refuge in Allah. That was the first thing he did. So he sought refuge in Allah Azza wa Jalla. After seeking refuge in Allah, he makes the one attempt that he could, which is what? He runs for the door. The door that he knows is what? It's locked. Zuleika just locked the door and she's just hidden the key, but he still runs to the door. He seeks refuge in Allah and he runs to the door because he's putting in effort. Because he's demonstrating to Allah, I'm trying to do something. And then as Allah opens the doors, and literally as Yusuf alayhi salam ran towards the door opened from the other side. So Zuleika's husband appeared. Now just think about the story that Allah is telling us and our analogy. Because the story that Allah is telling us is extreme. Because here, someone has physically invited Yusuf alayhi salam into sin. Whereas for us, we're seeking it out. Many of us are trying to look for Zuleika on a Friday or Saturday night. We're seeking that type of stuff out. But here, she sought out Yusuf alayhi salam. But the point that Allah looks to us, and this is amazing, and this is the Lord that we have, that He looks to the effort an individual puts in. What attempt have you done? They say, and the Mashaykh speak about, just from the analogy of Yusuf alayhi salam, they go, the reward that you get if someone, say, is addicted to a certain place, like they go to a shisha place and they get up to all sorts. And you do that when you come back from work. They say that if you take the long way home, just to avoid that, that's what Allah looks at. That's where Allah seeks that you will find the pleasure of Allah. If you block someone that you know you shouldn't be speaking to on WhatsApp, that's the effort that Allah Azza wa Jal looks to. That's what He's looking at. That's what makes a difference between someone just being a normal person and someone turning and attaining that pleasure of Allah Azza wa Jal. The stories mentioned by Allah are mentioned because they're relevant to us. And inshallah, because I'm just conscious of time, we're going to inshallah build on this a bit more. But also the beauty and the balance of Allah. Now just think about this, which is also in the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, that eventually, when Yusuf alayhi salam, when he leaves, so he seeks refuge in Allah, he makes the effort. And when he makes the effort, the door opens and he's arrested and so forth. But eventually, Yusuf alayhi salam marries Zuleika. And when he marries Zuleika, now this is amazing, because of how Allah anchors everything in the Akhirah, that Zuleika asks Yusuf alayhi salam to make a dua. And what was that dua? That Allah returned her beauty, her youth to her in this life. So they know that in Jannah, when all of us, inshallah, Allah pray that we all enter Jannah. Ameen. Maybe try that again. Inshallah, when Allah grants us all a place in Jannah. Ameen. MashaAllah. That all of us will be beautiful. All our youth will return, apart from Zulayka. Because the balance of Allah is amazing. You know? They get just like, I think Ustad Tahir was talking about Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he was catapulted into the fire. When he was catapulted, they stripped him of his clothes and then threw him in the fire. And our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, and he was speaking to Sayyidina Aisha radiallahu anha, he goes that on the day of judgment we will all be risen naked. And Sayyidina Aisha radiallahu anha goes, Ya Rasulullah, men and women naked? And the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, that day is so hard you won't even realise that. So that's something to say about. He gets apart from one person, Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam. Because he was unclothed in this life, Allah will ensure that he's clothed in the hereafter. Now that's a separate point, but what I want to, the takeaway from today really is just to think about why Allah Azza wa Jal talks about the story of Yusuf alayhi salam in the Quran. That he was invited to sin, and his effort, and you and I will say, but it's a pointless effort. He's running to a door that is locked, but Allah recognizes it. And and our door might be anything. Our door might be our phone, disconnecting ourselves from the internet, stop blocking someone on WhatsApp, taking the long way home. All of those might be the effort. We just need to put in the effort and allow Allah to open the door. That's it. And inshallah, tomorrow what I'm going to do is I'll just build on a bit more about this amazing thing that Allah does, and He looks to our effort, not to our results, which is just the polar opposite of this dunya. Everything in this world and everyone looks to results. It's not the effort you put in your exams, it's the result that you get. It's not the effort you put in the interview, it's what the result is. Yet with Allah, completely the opposite. He looks to your effort and He looks to your capacity. And inshallah we'll pick that up tomorrow. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakallah. Inshallah that concludes, so you're going to have an early night, you're here for tomorrow. Just a reminder so we can plan every odd night. We guarantee you, it's a big guarantee, you will not miss an element of it. Just like last year. Every odd night we'll have a good time. So I'll start planning, trying to get time off work early. I'm still going to work. I think one of my bosses is going to be glad I said that. Inshallah, from Tuesday night is the first odd night, so Tuesday night we'll have a good time.